Well, here we are. This channel is now 5 years old, and during that time, I've covered a lot of terrible misinformation and a lot of terrible people spreading that misinformation. But today, I'm going to talk to you about arguably the worst of those people. This is someone who could be profiting off of you or your family's suffering, and you might not even know it. So, if you enjoy seeing awful people be exposed for the awful things that they do on the internet, this video is definitely for you. I'm Dr. Wilson. I'm a PhD molecular biologist, and let me introduce you to William Makis. This is a guy who calls himself an oncologist and cancer researcher online, but he is in fact neither of those things. William did go to medical school and did get a medical degree and used to practice as a radiologist in Canada. But in 2018, he had his medical license revoked. This came after several allegations of sexual harassment or otherwise inappropriate behavior from his colleagues. And then he responded to these allegations by threatening one of these individuals who he thought was lying about him. So naturally, there was a hearing, and the verdict was that his medical license was to be stripped, and he was not allowed to practice medicine anymore. And now he brings that totally normal and level-headed behavior into his current role, an internet grifter. You see, since he couldn't practice medicine anymore and didn't want to go through a normal process of pursuing a medical career, like reapplying for a medical license in other areas or otherwise trying to convince his board to give his medical license back, he went to the internet to write Substacks. And the topic of these Substacks are infuriating. Aside from the usual COVID conspiracy and health misinformation nonsense that he writes about pretty often, he has several articles about people who he's never met, never talked to, but they all have one thing in common. They've all had a medical event or a death in the family, and him being the compassionate, caring, and critically thinking person he is, just finds these people situations, whether it's scrubbing obituaries or looking through social media profiles for people with a COVID vaccine banner on their profile picture, and then he just links that suffering to COVID vaccines for no reason. Oh, this person lost their mother to natural causes. Well, she had a COVID vaccine banner in her profile picture, so that means that COVID vaccine must have killed her. Oh, this kid has cancer? It's got to be COVID vaccines. Was the kid vaccinated? Who cares? He's going to write about it anyway. And he makes all of these articles pay to read. You have to pay and subscribe to him in order to access the articles. And his Substack has over 73,000 subscribers. I don't know if they're all paid, but this is how this guy is making his income. He is finding people's suffering online, lying about them, and profiting. Now, you might be wondering whether or not the people he writes about would appreciate this. I wondered the same thing, so I contacted several. Over the past year, sometimes when I would see this guy post articles, I would look up the name that he mentions in the title of his post. In some cases, I was able to find them or their family members or a member of their community on social media and message them with a link to the article, just letting them know. I would express my condolences to whatever their situation is, but I would also tell them that I feel they should know that this person is writing about them or their family member in a way that he is profiting from and may not be true. And wouldn't you know, in every single case, the person responded with disgust. They clearly did not know that this was happening and expressed a desire to take action against him, which is a fair response. I mean, this guy is finding these tragic situations and just making things up about them to suit his narrative and to directly make money off of them. And a lot of people believe him. Beyond his 73,000 subscribers on Substack, he's also been featured on Dr. Drew's podcast, which is fairly popular among the health disinformation crowd. And he has been praised on Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s website. And most recently, he was connected to an episode of the Joe Rogan podcast, where Mel Gibson told Joe Rogan that he had some friends who were at stage 4 cancer and then cured their cancers with Ivermectin and fenbendazole. And when it comes to cancer, I just want to first pause and point out that Makis has been trying to popularize the idea that COVID vaccines cause something that he made up called turbo cancer. That's part of a lot of his articles that he writes. He says that COVID vaccines caused turbo cancer in these people that he writes about with, of course, no evidence. And also turbo cancer, again, is made up. It's not a thing. It's not a term that anybody uses. It's not a term you can find on PubMed used anywhere. It's just something he made up to try to scare people into thinking that COVID vaccines cause something else that's scary. Of course, COVID vaccines don't cause cancer, let alone turbo cancer. There has been no rise in the rate of new cancer cases following COVID vaccines, and there's no plausible mechanism by which COVID vaccines could cause cancer. I've made videos in the past explaining this in some detail, but to summarize, in order to cause cancer, you have to have either chronic exposure to something that constantly causes something like inflammation or cell damage, or you have to have something that directly damages DNA. And COVID vaccines don't present either of those two scenarios to anybody. But that doesn't stop him just finding random names and attributing their cancers or deaths or other unfortunate situations to COVID vaccines without any evidence whatsoever. So back to this Mel Gibson episode of Joe Rogan. Mel says that he has friends who cured their stage 4 cancers with ivermectin and fenbendazole, and then William Makis tweets this. He says that he treated one of Mel Gibson's friends with ivermectin and fenbendazole. William, Willie, Willithy, when did you treat this person? You don't have a medical license. We know that you're lying about having cured someone's cancer with those drugs, but if this happened within the last 7 years, you're not only lying, you're breaking the law. You can't prescribe drugs to and treat people without a medical license. And doing that to someone who has stage 4 cancer is just sick. There's a whole terrible ecosystem out there on the internet that targets cancer patients with these ads of herbal supplements and natural remedies or just drugs that otherwise people don't want you to know about for whatever reason, just fill in the blank. And it's incredibly cruel because not only do these things not have any evidence backing them up as effective cancer treatments, but you're targeting people who are either in late stages of cancer and are desperate for options, or you're targeting people in early stages who have options but might forego them because you're telling them, no, don't do chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery or any of that. Just take my medication. I'm the one with the answers. Big Pharma and the doctors, they don't want you to have these answers that can cure your cancer. They'll say that, and then the patient will take their advice, forego evidence-based treatment, and then end up at stage 4 cancer, and you'll never hear their story. What often happens with these people that Mel Gibson might be talking about is that they're on evidence-based treatments and then they're also taking other things on the side, again, because they're desperate and they're getting exposed to this disinformation. And then thankfully their situation might get better. They might have tumor shrinkage. They might go into remission. They might get years added onto their life. And then they are there to tell their story, but they often don't tell the story correctly or honestly, or they have people who just straight up misrepresent their story. Meanwhile, what you don't see are the thousands of people who tried these things and it didn't work for them because they're dead, and dead people can't talk to you and tell their stories. It's something called survivor's bias. These kinds of stories have been around in the wellness industry forever. I'm not pointing out anything new. I'm just trying to shine a light on it with the little platform that I do have. And also after COVID, these disinformation channels are gaining more power and more influence in different circles. So what about this claim that ivermectin and fenbendazole work as cancer cures? Well, your first red flag to that situation is that ivermectin and fenbendazole are antiparasitic drugs, and they're very effective antiparasitic drugs. And if you remember during COVID, ivermectin was touted by Makis as well as other people as a cure for COVID, which was not true. It did not work for COVID. We tried. There are several randomized controlled trials from all over the world that tried to use ivermectin to treat COVID patients, and it didn't work. So now that it's also being touted as a cancer cure, that should be a big red flag to you, because if medications can cure parasitic diseases and claim to cure COVID and also claim to cure cancer, medications like that don't exist. Cure-alls don't exist. And that's something that a lot of wellness grifters will try to do. They'll try to market a single drug as a cure for lots of different things. But could ivermectin or fenbendazole have any use for cancer patients? Is there any research to this? The answer is yes, there is research, and maybe they could have some use for cancer patients, but they're not a cure. There's been some research in cells in a dish and some small animal models as to whether or not these drugs can cause tumor shrinkage or kill tumor cells. And there has been some evidence suggesting that they can, and clinical trials are being set up to test whether or not they have any use in treating cancer patients, in combination, of course, with other methods like chemotherapies, radiations, and surgeries. But in the scientific literature, stories like this are not uncommon. You can find a lot of different drugs or compounds that have this same profile. They show benefit in killing cancer cells in a dish or in small animal models, but they never quite make it to being effectively used in humans. And that can be for a number of reasons. It could be that you just can't make it bioavailable in humans, or you have to use such a high dose in humans that it's toxic, or it just has a completely different mechanism when you introduce it into a human body as opposed to cells in a dish or a mouse model. So hopefully future research shows that ivermectin or fenbendazole or other antiparasitic drugs have some use in cancer treatment. Some researchers think that this is really possible because they think that the ways these antiparasitic drugs kill parasites could be a similar mechanism by which they can kill cancer cells. But I honestly would not be surprised if they don't have any use at all. And definitely to claim that they are cures at this stage with no clinical evidence whatsoever is not only irresponsible, it's disgusting. I cannot stand these people who just profit off of disinformation and also use the suffering of others to just put themselves up and gain money or fame or political power in one way or another. And like I said earlier in the video, this is not uncommon. A lot of wellness influencers or alternative health proponents will do similar things, if not the exact same thing. For example, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who might be the next head of the HHS appointed by Trump and has made a career off selling vaccine disinformation and supplements on his website, wrote a foreword to a book called Cause Unknown. This was a book that was published during the pandemic, and it is just a collection of stories of people who, quote unquote, died suddenly. And of course, the implication throughout the whole book is that COVID vaccines are the cause. And just like William Makis and his Substacks, this book had no regard to actually check whether or not the vaccine had any link to what happened to these people, or whether or not they were even vaccinated in some cases. In fact, one of the teenage boys on the cover of the book is from a family who says that he was not vaccinated, and yet he is put front and center on this book. And Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and the authors of the book are absolutely silent as the parents are going on news stations just trying to beg somebody to do something about these people who are abusing their son's tragic story. Here is that boy's parents talking about this situation.
I think he's mostly known for his athletics. He was very into every sport he played, had a ton of friends. Everybody seemed to love that kid.
It puts Braden's death in a very false light. Braden was not vaccinated, so it really doesn't pertain to him in any way, shape, or form.
It's just another gut punch. Yeah. You know, we've been punched in the gut as hard as you can be punched in the gut, and this is just another one right after, you know.
It's so far from what his story is, and it's infuriating that somebody could be so heartless and not think about how they would feel if this was their loved one.
Yeah, if you're mad, you should be. So what can you do about these people? Well, the first thing you can do is be informed. Be informed so that you can recognize when something like this is happening, when someone is spreading disinformation for their own benefits at the cost of someone else or at the abuse of someone else's story. The second thing you can do is if you see something, say something. Call these people out on social media. Make sure that they know that people are not going to just sit by and watch them abuse these people for their own benefits and get away with it. And number three, when possible, you can also report these people to relevant authorities. If people are giving out medical advice or selling products that make medical claims and they're not qualified to do so, then they can be held liable. This is important because when people who are vulnerable fall into these beliefs that are spread by people like William Makis, then it only hurts the people who believe the lies. When people are suffering from genuine medical problems and they don't seek out evidence-based help, then most of the time they end up suffering needlessly because of it. And sure, you can find testimonials online from people who swear by certain products that have no evidence to support them being effective in anything, but these people say that it helped them. And again, I just want you to think about how many people are not around who tried that product and can't tell their story anymore because they didn't seek out evidence-based medicine and instead went for things that have no evidence, but were sold in a very convincing way by someone online who stands to benefit from them. So please don't buy into these conspiracy theories that doctors are all out to get you and that there is a hidden cure for cancer and that vaccines are secretly causing mass amounts of damage, because none of those things are true, and it's only going to hurt you and the ones you love by believing them. And that is going to do it for this video. All the links to all the research that I talked about are in the description below so that you can inform yourself and read these sources for yourself. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.